Welcome to another episode of Cash and Sport. I have a very special guest today, Mac G. I'll call him Mac G because we speak on Twitter every time. His name is Michael Goldman. He's a professor, he's a doctor, he's based out of the University of California. He's an adjunct professor at the Pretoria Gordon Institute of Business Science. He has specializations in marketing, sports sponsorship, sports marketing. But I mean, I could go on and on and on. This man understands sport, he understands the business of sport, and because he's a professor, he also knows how to teach the business of sport and explain complex, subjects in a simple way, much like I like to explain complex subjects in a simple way to you guys. So, Professor Michael Goldman, Dr. Michael Goldman, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been watching the World Cup. It's about 8 o'clock, almost 8 o'clock in the US. It's a bit early, but yeah, you've been
It's always
watching any
great.
games?
It is always great to wake up in the morning and turn on the TV and watch some great soccer and see some of our great African superstars, doing wonderful things in Qatar. So yeah, I've caught a few games.
Yeah,
Some have been more hair-raising than others, but it's great
yeah,
to watch and great excitement here in the US after yesterday's performance. It's
yeah.
great to see Team USA doing better, and that's going to be great for 2026 and great for the economic commercial side of the World Cup, which a lot of that is out of the US.
Absolutely. And while we're on that, there's a essentially US company, and Anheuser-Busch, which has a brand called Budweiser, which is one of the top three selling beers in the world in terms of volume. Budweiser's got a relationship with FIFA that stretches over 30 years, and they're the primary beer provider, or whatever you want to call it. But essentially, they have exclusive rights as the pouring partner of FIFA for the World Cup, and they pay per cycle. So the last cycle stretched from the Russia World Cup until now, and they pay about $75 million a cycle. They had a scandal. They weren't allowed to sell Budweiser in stadiums, and they're the pouring partner. What do you make of that situation?
Yeah, certainly it's a big power play by Qatar and the Supreme
Mm,
Council of Sport and the local organizing committee for this World Cup, just days, hours ahead of the start of the tournament. And so, it certainly is a crisis or controversy for us to talk about, and it points to some interesting power plays and interests within FIFA and Qatar and host countries that we need to understand. From a business point of view, for AB InBev, for the company that owns Budweiser and many of our SAB Miller brands as well, it's not a humongous deal. It's not a huge problem. If you think about it, the pouring rights in the stadiums are important, but they're only one piece of the
mm,
total sponsorship package. And yes, those revenues and that opportunity for people to try Bud who may not have tried otherwise, as fans, the million people traveling to Qatar to watch the World Cup and spectate, as well as obviously local fans, they missed out on that opportunity. The VIPs are still covered, right?
mm.
So there is Budweiser in the stadiums, and
Pay
that is
19,
available.
pay $19,000 and you can drink
Yeah,
Budweiser. Amazing stuff.
absolutely. Absolutely. But it's for the general consumption that is not catered for. Budweiser is in the stadiums with Budweiser Zero, the 0% alcohol beer, as we know with South African brands as well. And so their presence is there as a brand, and their presence is there as a product, just not as a beer product. And so that is, they will take some hit. They'll take a hit on volumes, their expected volumes during the tournament. They'll take an expected hit on revenues and on trial, right? The opportunity for people who may not drink Bud regularly to have a Bud beer and enjoy it while they're enjoying the soccer, and for that positive experience to be a potential conversion of that person to a Bud consumer going forward. From a marketing point of view, that's really important in terms of the funnel, moving a customer from being aware to buying regularly a product. And so they're going to miss out on that. And in fact, reports suggest that they want to claim back about 40% of that $75 million from FIFA. And that's going to be an ongoing conversation about a make-up, right? When parts of your rights package are not delivered, it's fair for a sponsor to ask for it to be made up in some way. But beyond the pouring rights of beer in the stadium, Budweiser is getting a lot of exposure anyway with their existing campaigns. And those are global campaigns, and they are country by country specific campaigns. And so I don't suspect that Budweiser will see a business downturn as a result of this. If anything, as you mentioned, all news is good news in the sense that the brand name of Budweiser and the business has been spoken about quite a bit over the last week or two. That's not going to, chase us out of our house to go and buy a Bud, but it does raise top of mind awareness of the brand. And so that will help as well. So yeah, Bud may get a bit of a makeup. They're not going to get cash in their pocket, I think, but they'll get a bit of a makeup through this tournament and the next tournament. But I don't think it's hugely bad for Bud. It does, as you say, raise questions for sponsors going forward. Going forward
Right.
to 26 and beyond, what are the nature of those deals? How secure are the packages in those deals that the sponsors negotiate? Can FIFA actually deliver on what they promise when a local organizing committee decides to go in a different direction? And if it's hours before the tournament, the local organizing committee has all the power. FIFA can't really do anything. Bud can't really do anything. We saw that with the armbands. We saw that with Bud Beer in the stadiums. And so that political question, that geopolitical question, that power question, that remains unresolved. And I think for sponsors going forward, they'll need to just think about those clauses, get the lawyers involved and make sure that those contracts are tighter going forward.
Right. And I looked at the Google searches for Budweiser immediately after the announcement, because it was announced essentially 2 days prior to the kickoff of the World Cup. And for my estimates, it went up. The searches, Google searches for Budweiser went up about 70% in the 2 days immediately after. So I mean, they still get to name the man of the match, which is the Budweiser man of the match. The advertising boardings are all around. People still see Budweiser everywhere. The stadiums are red. So in terms of the marketing element, I don't so much think that they would have had a hit. Actually, I think that they love it. And then the fact that they can then take all of that stock that they sent to Qatar and then ship it over to whoever it is that wins, and have that nation potentially experience a whole bunch of free Budweiser, I think it's still a win. It's an additional marketing layer for them, which they wouldn't have had access to regardless, if this wasn't the issue. So I don't necessarily think that they'll, have any complaints. Maybe they might want to make a makeup, and they would probably get that in maybe a bit of a discount in the fee that they pay for the next batch of rights, which is the next cycle for 4 years. So in the end, I don't think anything's going to happen. Budweiser is not going to complain to FIFA about the situation. Obviously, it's not ideal, but I mean, you're in Qatar, you're in a Middle Eastern country which is conservative. You could have expected that something like this could potentially happen because the citizens of the country aren't happy about it. But either way, I digress. We move on. You've helped a number of brands to formulate their strategy around FIFA and sponsorship. One of them being MTN while you were still here. Um, what are some of the considerations that brands could make? And looking at this specific issue, you mentioned just now that some of these brands would have to consider some of the clauses. What are some of these clause considerations that, maybe if the general public isn't aware, what are some of the issues that go into those contracts between FIFA and some brands that we may not necessarily be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. I think leveraging a sponsorship and taking advantage of a sponsorship opportunity, like any marketing asset that you acquire, any marketing opportunity that you invest in, is really thinking about what are the different stakeholders or target audiences for your activities. So that's the starting point. Marketing 101 is who's the customer or who's the relevant audience or stakeholder. And certainly in the work we did for MTN and other brands, thinking beyond the customer. And when you think about a sponsorship, the default approach is it sits in marketing, marketing spends the money, and they focused on existing customers for retention, and they focused on new customers for acquisition, right? That's a typical sponsorship model that's focused on marketing. But a business does business with many other kinds of audiences. Think about employees, for example. Same thing. How do we retain the best talent? How do we acquire the best talent? How do we motivate and engage our talent? talent. That's a critical component in any business. Standard Bank, for example, over the last few years, certainly with their soccer sponsorship in Africa, have done a brilliant job engaging people at the branch level, people at head office and regional levels through that sponsorship. So yes, it may result in a few more account holders and card holders, but how does it fire up the troops, right? How does it fire up the employees? So considering that stakeholder group is really important. Think about suppliers. In a supply chain, value chain kind of environment as we experienced through COVID, where the security of your supply chain and the extent to which you can actually deliver the raw materials and the other pieces of your value chain is really important. Could you use a sponsorship to have a stronger relationship, or perhaps a more appealing relationship, a better deal with some of your suppliers? Can you use a sponsorship for that? We've seen brands, for example, in the B2B, the business to business space, use ticket opportunities as a way of bringing some of their most important suppliers, not just customers, not just employees, but suppliers, to games and hosting them as part of building that relationship. And then lastly, regulators, journalists, the media, government officials, our friends in mining and minerals and energy, for example, for many decades have used sports events and other activities as a way of hosting and building relationships with key decision makers in the broader regulatory environment of their industry. And so how do we make sure that we capture the regulator, as they say, right? How do we build a strong relationship with the regulator in our industry so that we can get the licenses we need, so that we can get different specifications for products, etc., that we need? So really what I'm saying is, when you think about taking advantage of a sponsorship, signing a deal, and then thinking about what we get from that deal and what we do with those pieces, think beyond just customers. Think about these are different stakeholder groups, different audiences. What that does is it means it becomes an entire company sponsorship, not just a marketing department sponsorship. What that means is you get executive buy-in, right? And the entire C-suite is involved, right? The executive suite is involved in making sure that a sponsorship works, because a greater amount and part of the organization is involved. So that's really important. And of course, the third thing from that is, from a partnership point of view, that sponsorship is likely to be renewed going forward, because you're likely to show greater business value across the organization rather than just how many products that we sell to how many customers. There's greater business value overall. So, when we think about sponsorship becoming partnership, having a sponsorship work across multiple parts of the organization is one way of doing that.
Qatar spent a lot of money to put this World Cup together. So this specific World Cup is going to be the most expensive. It is the most expensive World Cup ever, $210 billion, which is the estimated amount. They spent about 10 billion of that money building new stadiums alone, and then the rest of it was infrastructure, etc., etc., etc. The next most expensive World Cup after that, I think, is 15 million, which was Russia. $15 billion, sorry. The South Africa World Cup, for instance, cost just about 3.5 billion. Is it sustainable anymore to have one nation hosting a World Cup with the costs incrementally going up and up and up? I know Qatar is a bit of an outlier with 200 billion, but from 3 to 15 billion is not a lot of money in 8 years.
It is a lot of money. And if it is public money, then more substantial questions need to be asked. Qatar is an outlier. And I think if you look at that graph that you have in front of you, everyone else is fairly similar. There have been increases in costs over time, especially as FIFA has moved World Cups to emerging markets or countries where there's been a need for greater investment in event-specific infrastructure. So if I need to build a bunch of stadiums, or I need to substantially upgrade a bunch of stadiums where I'm spending money really only for that month, only for the hosting of those games during that month, then certainly that can be seen as a bit of a waste and can be seen as over-investing in a short-term event. But FIFA has, in that sense, seen the light. And as much as they want to globalize the hosting of the World Cup, and they want to go to interesting places that they haven't been to before, like we saw with South Africa's World Cup um, uh,
Qatar.
Brazil and Qatar and Russia. US 2026 or US, Mexico, and Canada, the unity bid for 2026 is a return to a commercially safe, lower cost in terms of event-specific infrastructure, and most likely much higher revenues World Cup that we will see. Remember, FIFA doesn't really worry how much a country spends because the country spends that. FIFA doesn't spend that. And we saw that in South Africa, where Sepp Blatter applied pressure, and you've got the Cape Town Stadium and that kind of issue about, perhaps countries overspending. And South Africa, in some respects, overspent on certainly some of the stadiums, and Qatar has massively overspent. The US will not overspend. Partly because it can't be funded from taxpayers in the way that you can perhaps in some other countries. Taxpayers in the US here are much more vigilant, and are much more unhappy if they're spending a cent more than they need to spend. So you're going to see a lot less public money, a lot less taxpayer money going towards these things. What you are seeing in places like Los Angeles as they think about 26 and the 28 Olympics, just down the road here in California, is investment in trains, investment in road infrastructure. And that's really about public infrastructure investment that is happening with the World Cup as an excuse for it to happen. It should happen anyway. We should be building roads. We should be building train tracks, etc. anyway. But a World Cup and scary FIFA and the IOC breathing down your neck makes all of that happen much quicker. And means money can be found to do that much more easily. And so Los Angeles is taking advantage of that in the same way Qatar did, in the same way South Africa did with the Gautrain, for example. Think about the timeline of the Gautrain and how that was moved up to meet the requirements of the World Cup. It was never a World Cup project, but it became a World Cup project. So I think you'll see the same thing as we head towards 26. The World Cup does not...
The World Cup is hugely politically convenient for those who essentially need to deliver things that they ordinarily wouldn't be able to do. And I mean, the example that you make at the moment right now with Qatar and South Africa, etc. Qatar has built airports, highways, etc., etc., etc. Right now, Egypt is building an entire new city. What are they using as a reason for building that entire new city with two giant sports stadiums? They want to become Africa's #1 go-to destination for sporting events. And yes, the sporting events are great. It's a great excuse. It's a great reason. But politically speaking, if you're going to pump in billions and billions into the economy, you're going to stimulate the economy in terms of infrastructure builds, etc., etc., etc. Politically, it looks great. And it's a great tool to use for running for the next term. But while we're on this issue of multi-country hosting of World Cups, the next few World Cups have some very interesting combinations. There was a World Cup bid with Portugal that all of a sudden had the Ukraine thrown into it because I would hasten to say it's politically convenient right now to throw the UK in as a potential partner with Spain. But the World Cup hosting model, do you think that it's fundamentally changing now with these multi-country hosting bids, or will we go back to the single country hosting bids in the future?
I think we'll see a combination. I think where geographically it makes sense to leverage stadiums and infrastructure that's nearby across a few countries, then I think you might see that. I think you might see in Western Europe, for example, you might see a Germany combination with something else nearby. because it may be so easy to move back and forth. Now, Mexico, the US, and Canada is not near. Well, I mean, they border each other, but they're not really nearby, right? These are massive spaces. It's certainly not like Qatar where you can walk from one to the other. But there are some political benefits to that. Of course, you're planning now 10, 15 years ahead in these events, and so politics can change. We saw that with Mexico and the US's relationship through the Donald Trump presidency, and the awarding of the bid. And now you've got, Donald Trump talking about building the wall and talking about Mexico, but on the other hand, you've got a shared bid between Mexico, the US, and Canada. And of course, politics change, and now it's a very different situation. By the time 2026 rolls around, we might have a different president, and so these things change. And as with all business survives politics. Business goes in spite of politics and beyond politics, and just makes politics work for business. And so I think FIFA and World Cup hosts will continue to do that. I think we'll see a combination. I think we will see some mixed countries where it makes sense. But then other countries will continue to want to use mega events like the World Cup, like the Olympics and others, as a way of soft power influence, as a way of raising their global brand within the geopolitical context, as a way of getting a stronger seat at the table, as a way of using tourism and trade benefits from being the spotlight on the global media landscape for at least a month. So, there are all of those reasons why spending $300 to $200 billion is a good idea, if you can justify it within the overall strategy of the country. And so I think you'll continue to see that going forward. Yes, there'll be issues around sustainability and the environment, and bids going forward are much more focused on how to decrease the carbon footprint, if not remove the carbon footprint of a World Cup. So those kinds of issues, I think, will continue to be top of mind as FIFA makes decisions about where to put the World Cup.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about sustainability and the future of the World Cup itself. It is the goose that lays the golden egg for FIFA. They've tried to nurture it. It makes them 90% of their revenue. And I mean, beyond sponsors and broadcast money, the World Cup that comes once every 4 years with its millions of people watching across the globe is everything to FIFA. Without that, the organization wouldn't exist. But Michael Goldman, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, and enlightening us on some of the minutiae around sponsorship, especially around FIFA, because there's a documentary out right now on Netflix speaking about the politics of the World Cup. It's not going to die. It's still the most attractive, the most enthralling tournament in the world. And whoever it is that comes and goes, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the World Cup will probably still survive. It'll have different guises. The makeup will look different, and the people in charge will look different.
Absolutely. Whether you think about American sport and you think about the Super Bowl in the NFL, or you think about FIFA globally, you have sports platforms, sport and entertainment platforms that reach billions of people. You have sport and entertainment platforms that engage those people and that they feel a very strong attachment and an emotional connection. And that drives what they think, feel, and do. And that drives dollars and how they spend it. So from a business point of view, it makes a massive amount of sense. And I think for the NFL, for FIFA, for those kind of platforms, yes, the business will continue to build. They're off a strong base, and it'll all be a question of how they navigate some of this complexity, which I guess interests all of us as we think about how we build these organizations and manage the business of sport.
And manage the business of sport, we shall continue to do. Dr. Michael Goodman, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and having a conversation with me. I look forward to engaging with you some more. These conversations, I think, are really important, especially us as Africans, explaining to the rest of the continent what's going on, that there actually is a business of sport across the continent of Africa, and continue to do what you do at Gibbs, continue to do what you do at the University of California. I was very, very, very honored to help some of your cohorts of students during the Super Sport Leaders, Future Leaders in Africa training that you did early on in the year, and that was probably my first sort of interaction outside of social media. And I must say, you're doing incredible work, and thank you so much for what you continue to do for the industry.
No, absolutely. It's a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. And yes, long may the conversation continue. There's so much more work to be done.
That was a conversation with Professor Michael Goldman. He's a very learned professor based in the University of California, speaking about the issues of FIFA, issues around sponsors, pouring rights for Budweiser. There's really a lot going on in the media right now, but ultimately, nothing's really going to change. Budweiser's may look for a clawback of their revenue, but at the end of the day, this is a small issue in the grand scheme of the entire relationship with FIFA. Beyond that, some sponsors may have to look at their relationships and how they work. And also, we need to look at the sustainability of World Cups. But as Marco Goldman, put it so well, that the World Cup is the biggest sporting showpiece. Millions of people watch it throughout the world. Billions of people watch it throughout the world. Millions of people travel every 4 years to go and watch it live. It is every player's pinnacle, that they want to reach for their country, and it's not going to go away. However, the World Cup is changing, and the way that World Cups are held is changing, and it'll be very interesting to see how this continues to evolve going forward. But anyway, if you've gotten to this point, thank you so much for watching. We appreciate you coming on. Please do comment, like, subscribe, hit the subscribe button, share this to all of your friends and your colleagues or whomever it is that you think might find this interesting. And we will see you in the next one. Cheers.